You're listening to The Girl in the Girly Dress Who Loved Drug Dealers, a comedic memoir with business wisdom by me. This is the introduction. The girly girl in the wrong rooms. I know I don't look like it. That's usually how the sentence starts, and honestly, that's probably how this book should start too. Recently, I was in the backseat of a Chevy truck with my boyfriend and his friend. We were passing a backwood between us, windows cracked just enough to let the smoke curl out into the California night. The conversation was easy, relaxed, the way it gets when people are high and honest. Then he looked at me with my blonde braids pulled back in a ponytail, oversized glasses sliding down my nose, hoop earrings catching the street light, baggy shirt and sweatpants doing their best to hide the fact that I'm actually very intentional about comfort these days. He laughed, not meanly, just observationally. You one of them whitewashed black girls, huh? I laughed too, because in Southern California, if you're a black woman born here, that label finds you eventually. If your voice doesn't carry a certain cadence, if your interests don't fit a certain mold, if you exist outside someone's narrow imagination of what blackness is supposed to sound like, look like, move like. Nah, I said, taking the blunt back. I've lived many lifetimes. He didn't know what I meant. How could he? He didn't know I don't look like the kind of woman who used to date drug dealers. I don't look like the girl who sat quietly in rooms where ambition smelled like weed and money moved faster than morals. I don't look like the girl who wore dresses, said prayers, read books, and somehow still found herself falling in love with men whose lives existed just outside the rules I was raised to follow. But I did, and this book is me finally telling the truth about it with humor, honesty, and zero shame. I grew up a Christian girl, church, structure, morals, expectations, the kind of upbringing where your future is supposed to look a certain way, and the men you date are supposed to fit neatly into that picture. It was expected, not suggested, expected, that I would marry a Christian man, a good one, a godly one, someone who prayed before meals and led with scripture and treated women the way the Bible said to. I tried. God, I tried. And every single one of them tried to kill me. I don't mean that metaphorically. Every abusive relationship I was in, the kind where you stop recognizing yourself, where your body becomes a war zone, where love and violence get so tangled you can't tell them apart anymore, was with a religious man. Men who quoted scripture, men who led prayer circles, men who everyone trusted. I didn't expect Christ followers to abuse their women. That betrayal, spiritual, emotional, physical, cracked something open in me. It made me question everything I'd been taught about safety, about goodness, about where God actually shows up. And when I finally left that world, when I finally stopped trying to make those men into who I needed them to be, I stumbled into something I never saw coming. I felt safer with drug dealers. I know how that sounds. I know the judgment that sentence carries, but it's the truth, and the truth is more complicated than people want it to be. The abuse that came with the drug dealers was different. It was present, yes, inconsistency, emotional whiplash, the chaos of loving someone whose life operates outside the law. But it wasn't the same because the drug dealers had different morals than the Christian men. And they didn't hide behind righteousness. They didn't weaponize scripture. They didn't perform goodness in public while terrorizing you in private. What you saw was what you got. And somehow that honesty, even when it was flawed, felt like relief. Somewhere along the way, curiosity met contradiction. And instead of running from it, I leaned in. I didn't fall in love with danger. I fell in love with flavor. At first, it was an accident. I wasn't seeking out this type. But then I started noticing things. These men looked manly, not in a performative way, not in a way that required an audience, just solid. Different shapes and sizes, but all of them carried themselves like they knew exactly who they were. They were handsome, not in a symmetrical model way, but in a way that felt lived in, like their faces told stories, like confidence had carved itself into their posture. They had their own walk, you know what I mean? If you've ever seen it, that stride that doesn't rush, doesn't apologize, doesn't adjust itself based on who's watching. A walk that says, I belong wherever I decide to stand. They moved with confidence, they were brave, and next to them, I felt like a woman, not diminished, not decorative, not performing femininity to earn approval, just woman, soft, seen, protected without being controlled, and I loved being around that. The flavor I was attracted to was high energy, always talking, always telling me something, animated, expressive, stories that unfolded with hand gestures and laughter and tangents that somehow always circled back to the point. I loved it. I loved the generosity, the way they moved through the world with an ease I hadn't seen in men who spent their lives seeking approval, the way ambition looked when it wasn't watered down by fear or tied to someone else's permission. With ambition, with generosity, with men who worked for themselves, even if their business model wasn't something you could put on a resume. I fell in love with masculinity that felt present, protective, and proud. Men who wore their hearts on their sleeves, even when they didn't know how to treat mine gently. Men who showed me hustle before I ever learned the word entrepreneur. Men who taught me lessons I didn't realize were lessons until years later, when I was building a business of my own and thought, wait, I've seen this before. What I didn't fall in love with and what ultimately made me leave was the inconsistency, the emotional whiplash, the way love could feel generous one moment and careless the next. I didn't mind the business, I minded the pain, and that distinction matters. At some point, marijuana stopped being something I was around and became something I genuinely enjoyed. Not because of rebellion, not because of escapism, but because it slowed me down enough to hear myself think. I remember the first time I really noticed it. I was sitting at a park, not in a rush to move, not on my phone, not performing productivity or trying to optimize my time. Just there. I had just smoked a pre-roll, nothing fancy, just something I'd picked up. And I was in my journal, writing, reflecting, letting thoughts unfold without forcing them into neat conclusions. Then I looked up and I noticed how calm I was. My shoulders weren't tight, my jaw wasn't clenched, my mind wasn't racing 5 steps ahead, catastrophizing or planning or defending. I was just present and peaceful. That was new. It helped me relax into my body. It helped me read longer, write deeper, and soften into a life that no longer felt like it was constantly demanding something from me. I became a girl who could get high and read and be happy and peaceful and productive. A perfect evening looked like this: smoking a bowl from the bong and coughing so much my eyes watered, then reaching for my coffee cup, the one that held hot chocolate, not coffee, because I'd learned I liked the sweetness with the smoke. I'd settle into my couch or my bed, book in hand, blanket pulled up, music low or silent, and just exist. No agenda, no performance, no trying to be anything other than exactly where I was. I was happy. And that might sound small to someone else, but for me it was revolutionary. Because there was a time when my nervous system didn't know peace, a time when love felt exciting but unstable, when ambition felt intoxicating but risky, when I didn't yet know how to separate lessons from lovers. This is not a book glorifying street life. This is not a book romanticizing harm. This is not a confession of regret. This is a comedic memoir with business wisdom, written by a woman who survived her contradictions, learned from unexpected teachers, and came out the other side softer, smarter, and self-made. This book is about that evolution. Each chapter is a story, one man, one moment, one realization at a time. And layered inside each story is something deeper: the business lesson I didn't know I was learning, the boundary I didn't know I needed, the part of myself I hadn't yet claimed. You'll hear about negotiation, about branding, about consistency, about loyalty, about systems, about risk, about knowing when to walk away in love and in business. You'll also hear about romance, the kind that makes you feel chosen and seen, even when it's flawed, the kind that teaches you what you want by showing you what you won't tolerate again. And yes, you'll hear about weed, buds and books, smoking and thinking, laughing and reflecting, the rituals, the calm, the creativity, the way it became part of my soft life, not my survival. I'm not here to convince anyone to do what I do. Not everyone can smoke. Not everyone should. Not everyone will understand this path. whatever you believe is correct for you. This story is for me and for the few who will see themselves in it. The women who looked like they didn't belong in certain rooms but were absorbing everything. The women who loved deeply, learned painfully, and built beautifully anyway. The women who had to outgrow people without resenting the role they played. The women labeled whitewashed, who knew their blackness was never up for debate. It was just more expansive than the box people tried to build around it. I don't date drug dealers anymore, but I won't pretend they didn't shape me. They showed me how ambition moves when it's not watered down by fear. They showed me generosity without condition, even if love came with complications. They showed me hustle before I ever owned the word CEO. And I took what was useful, left what was harmful, and built a life that finally feels like mine. This book is not about who they were, it's about who I became. The girl in the girly dress, the woman with the backbone, the reader, the writer, the business owner, the healed one. Welcome to the story. Thank you for listening. If this chapter resonated with you, I'd love to hear how it made you feel. You can share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to support this work, you can pre-order the book using the link in the comments.